It is now believed that the stories of these mass graves could be false after excavations have turned up no human remains.
Canadians were shocked as discoveries of thousands of potential mass graves made headlines. But some media outlets are calling it a hoax, and elected officials are piling on. What is going on here? Denialist rhetoric has been pushed by people in positions of power. It's been seen in sensational news articles, op-eds, and social media attacks on Indigenous communities. It's even led to people showing up to unmarked burial sites with shovels.
There is documentary proof. There are these photographs. There are these plans. There are death certificates that right on the death certificate, it says, buried in the Indian Residential School Cemetery. There's no doubt these institutions had cemeteries. We just need to find them. We have found burials of children long before to Kamloops happened. It's an ongoing sort of disappointment, concern that individuals are really traumatizing communities as they're doing this already traumatic work that they have to do.
Let's look into how these searches are being conducted and what evidence has been found so far. The federal government says it will provide communities up to $3 million to conduct a search, but not all communities have received this money. This process begins by Special Interlocutor on Missing Children and Unmarked Burials, Kimberly Murray, being invited into communities, hearing testimonies from survivors, and visiting unmarked burial sites. Murray's role is to not only visit these sites, but put together a report on how these sites should be handled. An interim report was published in June, and a final report will be published at the end of her mandate in summer of 2024. Searches are being conducted using non-invasive archaeological tools, such as aerial scanning, and more often, ground-penetrating radars, also known as GPRs. GPRs create an image of what lies underground by sending radio waves, measuring the object, and sending the radio waves back. When picturing how these images look, don't picture it like a clear image. Picture it more like a stencil. Imagine what GPRs produce as an outline, rather than an image-like photo. Those using GPRs are looking for areas in the ground that have been disturbed, as digging graves results in changes in the soil, including density and composition. These changes in the soil can be identified by GPRs and are called anomalies. At the beginning of this year, a jawbone was found at Star Blanket Cree Nation at a site where they've detected over 100 anomalies. The jawbone was found near a gopher hole, suspected to be unearthed by the animal. It's been determined that this jawbone belonged to a 5-year-old 125 years ago. Not all anomalies equate to unmarked burials or human remains.
Pine Creek had to do some excavation work in the basement of the church, and thankfully it was determined that the anomalies were not burials.
Indigenous communities are cautious in the terminology that they use to describe these discoveries, calling them possible graves, anomalies, or areas of interest. But still, misinterpretation is occurring, where cautious language is being twisted and used to fuel the narrative that this is all just a hoax. In May 2021, the Kamloops Secwepemc Nation announced it had detected 215 possible unmarked graves at a former residential school in Kamloops. But some had misinterpreted it to mean that 215 children's bodies had been found at the site. Just because all of these anomalies aren't unmarked burials, it doesn't mean that none of these sites are graves containing human remains. There's plenty of evidence to prove that First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children died in residential schools. An online database published by the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation shows where former residential schools were located across the country. This database shows some of the names of children who died at these schools. This database also allows you to search who died in these schools by name. According to a report published by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, bodies are suspected to be buried near the residential school sites. I quote from the report, "Subjected to institutionalized child neglect in life, they have been dishonored in death." Conducting these searches helps identify the truth of Canada's genocidal history. It will determine what happened to the bodies of Indigenous children that died in the residential school system. Are there any barriers in the way of starting the dig at some of these sites? Local 514 spoke with Grand Chief Garrison Satie from the Pimiki-Kamak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. I attended the National Conference on Unmarked Burials in Montreal in September, where I saw Satie's presentation on how searches are being conducted for unmarked burials in sites near his reserve.
We have to protect these sites. As of now, they are not protected. And we've been advocating to have a similar process to what they have in the United States. And the process is called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, known as NAGPRA. And it is a federal law that exists to protect the sites and also the consultation of Native Americans regarding repatriation of their loved ones. So also it is a law to ensure that objects and sacred objects and objects of cultural patrimony in museums are repatriated to communities and First Nations. We don't have such a law in Canada, and we are advocating that there should be something like that in Canada to ensure that these sites are protected, because some of them are on private land and our people do not have access to go to ceremonies there.
Satie said that his nation will not wait until these laws come into place to start conducting searches, as these laws may take a long time to come into effect. Not all grave sites were at residential schools.
There are Indigenous children buried all over Turtle Island in various different locations and situations. We're learning, and as my interim report showed, children were transferred between and among various institutions, federal and provincial institutions, and it shouldn't matter that the child died in a provincial institution. It was the same policy that Canada had, that they would not pay to return the child home. And so we're finding family members buried in municipal cemeteries, in unmarked graves, in mass graves. I was just at one 10 days ago. There's 28 children buried in one grave.
In Montreal, a group of Mohawk women, known as the Gonastansara, or Mohawk Mothers, are fighting for an Indigenous-led search at the grounds of the old Royal Victoria Hospital. They allege that Indigenous children were experimented on and buried near the hospital during the illegal CIA-ran MKUltra experiments. Last month, the judge agreed that both McGill and Quebec's public infrastructure company, the SQI, breached their contract by firing the appointed expert panel of archaeologists to lead the investigation into possible unmarked burials near the site. Both parties dismissed the panel in July and have been orchestrating the search themselves. The court ordered McGill and the SQI to rehire the panel. The expert panel was a part of a deal struck in April between the developers and the Gonastansara, who have fought to stop construction over concerns that it could desecrate human remains. Local 514 spoke with Gontanada over the phone, a member of the Gonastansara. She says that McGill and the SQI are continuing construction without oversight from an expert panel. The Gonastansara are also calling for McGill to release the records of Indigenous children that were experimented on at the old Royal Victoria Hospital in order to support the search. McGill and the SQI did not respond to a request for comment before the publication of this video.
I think it's unfortunate that we had to go to court to actually get an order to have the expert panel reinstated. They should never have been dismissed. The whole purpose of having them in place was for them to step by step give guidance and direction on what we needed to do as we followed the truth. So it wasn't an end date as the province of Quebec and McGill thought. And, you know, obviously we're pleased that the judge interpreted the settlement agreement the way that reinstated the panel. So once we have the panel back in place, we'll be able to look at how we can undo what they've done in the time that the panel was fired and put a good plan in place for moving forward.
Denying the existence of these unmarked burial sites by labeling it as a hoax is so dangerous, because it not only trivializes the massive amount of death that resulted in the residential school system, but also the trauma that was experienced and continues to be experienced by survivors of this school system and the descendants of these survivors.
In the residential school, I wasn't a person. I mean, they gave me a number. Can you imagine that? A number. And my number was 7, 5 years old. and to be given a goddamn number. We're not even considered a person.
So what can be done to combat denialism?
I think it's really important and that we have a need to amend our criminal code to make it a criminal act to incite hate against Indian residential school survivors or to misstate and downplay what happened in Indian residential schools. We did it for Holocaust, for the Holocaust, and we have a need to do it for Indian residential schools. Not all the provinces have mandatory curriculum around Indian residential schools, and we need to continue to fight for that.
Our people have gone through enough already, and for people to start saying things like that is harmful for the survivors. It's harmful to the families. And for us as leaders, that we've been trying our best to ensure that we find our missing children and in unmarked graves. So and I think the government should step up and just lay down the facts.
What do you think of the hoax narrative being spread around unmarked burial sites? Let us know below in the comments.